Welcome back, Deep Divers. Today we are going to be diving deep into uh, culturally responsive teaching and the brain.
Ooh, great book.
It is, and this book really blends, our knowledge of neuroscience
Yes.
with kind of best practices for reaching all learners.
Yeah,
And honestly, I'm kind of seeing as we're going through this book that this is not just for teachers. Like anyone who's ever had to learn anything
absolutely.
can really get something out of this.
It's true.
So what is this book kind of all about?
So, this book really delves into how our cultural experiences can
Yeah.
shape how our brains process information.
Right.
And so it's kind of like we're all running the same basic brain hardware,
Uh-huh.
but the software is really influenced by the culture we grew up in.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So how does that actually kind of play out in a learning environment?
Well, imagine a classroom where a student feels like their cultural background isn't valued.
Right.
Maybe the examples that are used in the lessons don't resonate with their
Right.
experience, or, you know, the communication style feels jarring compared to
Yeah.
what they're used to at home.
Right.
The book argues that, this mismatch can actually trigger the brain's threat response.
It's like their brain is saying like, "Hold on, something's not right here."
Exactly.
And when that happens,
Yeah.
learning takes a back seat.
Yes, absolutely. Because instead of focusing on understanding that new information,
Right.
their energy is going towards, dealing with that underlying sense of unease.
Totally.
Yeah.
So the book talks about this idea of the brain's prime directive,
Yes.
which is minimizing threats and seeking well-being.
Yes.
But how can we, like, as learners or teachers, how can we tap into that prime directive
Right.
to create a better learning experience?
Well, I think it starts with understanding that what feels safe and welcoming to one person, um, you know, based on their cultural background,
Right.
might feel threatening to someone else.
Right.
And so it's really about, being aware of our own biases and
Yeah.
how those might be showing up
Yeah.
in the learning environment.
Yeah. So it's not just about being, like, nice or treating everyone the same.
Exactly.
It's about recognizing
Yeah.
those subtle differences
Mm.
in how people perceive and respond to the world around them.
Yeah, it's about being sensitive to things like communication styles, the way we give feedback, and even the physical layout of the learning space.
Right.
And the book emphasizes that we need to go beyond just celebrating surface level diversity like food or holidays.
Right. Right. We need to go deeper, like actually understanding
Absolutely.
and valuing those deeper cultural values that shape how a person sees the world.
Absolutely. And the book uses this analogy that I think is really helpful.
Okay.
It compares culture to the software that runs on the hardware of our brains.
Oh,
Just
yeah.
like software tells a computer how to operate. Culture shapes how we process information and interact with the world.
That's a really good analogy.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say you grew up in a culture that values um, collaboration and group learning.
Sure.
Does the book suggest that your brain is actually like wired differently because of that?
That's a great example. The
Yeah.
book delves into, two key cultural archetypes, which
Hmm.
are individualism and collectivism.
Okay.
And, it suggests that if your culture leans more towards collectivism,
Yeah,
you might thrive in learning environments where collaboration and teamwork
Yeah.
are emphasized.
that makes sense.
On the other hand, someone from a more individualistic culture might prefer independent study
Right.
or one-on-one instruction.
Totally. So
Totally.
how can we use this knowledge about cultural differences in learning styles
Right.
to create a more effective learning environment?
Well, the book suggests that teachers can use this knowledge to design lessons
Yeah.
that cater to a variety of learning preferences.
Right.
It's really about offering different pathways to understanding
Mhm.
rather than assuming that everyone learns the same way.
So instead of just lecturing or assigning, individual worksheets,
Right.
you might also incorporate like group projects, discussions, or activities that allow students to express their learning through, art, music, or storytelling.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
The key is to create a learning environment that feels inclusive
Right.
and allows each student to tap into their cultural strengths.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes me think about this idea of making the familiar strange that the book talks about.
Yes.
Could you elaborate on that a bit?
Sure.
It sounds a bit like, I don't know, a mind game.
It is a little bit of a mind shift, I think.
Okay.
It's really about encouraging teachers to examine their own cultural backgrounds
Mhm.
and to recognize how their own values and beliefs might be influencing their teaching practices.
Yeah.
It's easy to assume that our way of seeing the world is the right way,
Right.
but this concept really challenges us to step outside of our own cultural bubble
Yeah.
and to see things from different perspectives.
Totally. Totally. So it's not about erasing our own culture. It's just about being aware of it
Right.
and how it might impact our interactions with students from different backgrounds.
Absolutely.
It's kind of like almost holding up a mirror to yourself, isn't it?
That's a great way to put it. It's
Yeah.
about self-reflection and being willing to learn from our students.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, the book also talks about how our experiences
Yes.
can actually change the physical structure of our brains.
It's true.
This whole concept of like neuroplasticity
Yes.
was mind-blowing to me.
It really is remarkable.
Yeah.
Her brains are constantly adapting and rewiring themselves
Uh-huh.
based on our experiences.
Right.
And, the book highlights that when we learn something new,
Yeah.
we're literally creating new connections in our brains.
So if we're constantly learning and growing, like our brains are literally changing shape.
They are. It's incredible.
That's amazing. But how does this tie into like culturally responsive teaching?
Well, it suggests that by creating learning experiences that are culturally relevant and engaging,
Right.
we're not just teaching content, we're actually helping students build new neural pathways in
Right.
their brains. We're literally expanding their capacity to learn and grow.
Wow, that's incredible.
It really is.
And it really underscores the importance of making learning like relevant and engaging for all students.
Absolutely.
Now, I've got to ask about this idea that mistakes are brain-boosting opportunities.
Oh, yeah.
It sounds like counterintuitive, but the book really emphasizes this point.
Yes.
How does that work exactly?
Well, it's all about how we frame those mistakes.
Okay.
Instead of viewing them as failures,
Yeah.
we can see them as valuable feedback.
Uh-huh.
And, when we make a mistake, our brains actually spark with activity,
Right.
trying to figure out what went wrong and
Yeah.
how to do better next time.
Huh.
But here's the key. For that brain-boosting magic to happen,
Yeah,
the learner needs to feel safe to make mistakes.
that makes total sense.
Yeah.
If a student is, constantly afraid of being judged or punished for getting something wrong,
Right.
they're likely to, shut down and avoid taking risks.
Exactly.
But if they feel like supported and encouraged to learn from their mistakes,
yeah.
they're more likely to like persevere and develop that
Absolutely.
growth mindset that the book talks about.
Exactly.
So we're talking about like shifting the whole culture of the classroom
Yes.
from one that, emphasizes perfection
Right.
to one that values like effort, growth, and learning from our mistakes.
Yes,
That's powerful stuff.
it is.
Now, the book also talks about these 6 core design principles for culturally responsive teaching.
Right.
Can you give us a quick overview?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think these principles are kind of like a roadmap for
Okay.
creating a learning environment that taps into the brain's natural wiring
Mm-hmm.
and fosters success for all learnings.
Okay.
The first principle is that culture guides how we process information.
Okay.
And we've already touched on this a bit,
Mm.
but it's really about recognizing that different cultures might have different ways of learning and knowing.
So instead of trying to fit everyone into the same mold,
Right.
we need to provide diverse learning experiences
Yes.
that honor those cultural differences.
Yes.
What's the next principle?
So the second one is that learning is a social activity.
Okay.
And this really speaks to, our brains are wired for connection,
Yeah.
and we learn best when we can interact with others, share ideas, and collaborate.
So it's not just about sitting quietly
Right.
and absorbing information.
It's about actively engaging with the material
Yeah.
and with each other.
Exactly.
So the third principle is that emotions drive attention and memory,
Okay.
which speaks to the importance of creating a learning environment that feels emotionally safe and supportive.
Right.
We know that when students feel stressed or anxious,
Huh.
their brains actually shut down learning mode.
Yeah, that's where that what is it, the amygdala hijack comes in?
Yes.
Right. It's like that fight or flight response
Exactly.
that takes over when we feel threatened.
Exactly.
So if we want students to be able to like access those higher order thinking skills.
Yes,
We need to create an environment that
right.
feels safe and welcoming for everyone.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what about, what's the fourth principle?
So the fourth principle is that the brain physically grows with new learning and challenges.
Okay.
And this really ties back to that concept of neuroplasticity that we were talking about.
Yeah.
Um, every time we learn something new, we're actually changing the physical structure of our brains.
So we're not just like filling our brains with information.
Right.
We're actually like expanding their capacity.
We are.
That's a pretty cool thought.
It is. It's really fascinating, and it highlights the importance of challenging our students
Yeah.
and providing them with opportunities to stretch their thinking.
Right, right. Okay, two more principles to go.
Yes.
What's next?
So the fifth one is explicit instruction about how the brain learns accelerates learning.
Okay.
And this is really about teaching students about how their brains work,
Right.
how to focus their attention, how to manage their emotions, and how to use effective learning strategies.
So instead of just telling them to study harder, we can actually
Right.
give them the tools and knowledge they need
Yeah, equip them with the tools.
to become more effective learners.
Yes.
Okay, and the final principle.
The final principle is that wise feedback grows brain power.
Okay.
And this is really about providing students with specific, actionable feedback
Yeah.
that helps them understand what they're doing well,
Right.
where they need to improve, and how to get there.
So it's not just about pointing out what's wrong.
Right.
It's about giving them the guidance
Yeah.
they need to make progress and grow.
Exactly. It's about creating a learning partnership
Right.
where the teacher and student are working together
Yeah.
towards a common goal, the student's success.
Okay, that's a great overview of the 6 principles.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to think about how these principles can be applied not just in a like traditional classroom setting,
Right.
but in any learning environment, whether it's, at
Definitely.
work, at home, or even just in our own personal lives.
It's true. These principles are really about understanding how the brain learns best
Yeah,
and creating environments that support that learning.
right.
And that's something we can all benefit from.
I agree. Absolutely.
One of the things that really struck me in the book was the discussion about dependent learners. And these are students who often struggle in traditional classroom settings,
Right.
not because they lack ability,
Right.
but because they haven't been given the tools and support they need to thrive.
Yeah, you've probably encountered a student who seems bright,
Yes.
but just like isn't engaged.
Yes.
And the book calls these dependent learners.
Right.
And it suggests that their lack of participation might stem from a feeling of like learned helplessness.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
Okay, so
These students may have experienced repeated failures or felt like they didn't belong in the classroom.
right.
And over time, this can lead to a belief that no matter how hard they try,
Yeah,
they're going to fail.
right. And that could be like incredibly discouraging, especially for students who are already facing like challenges outside of school.
Absolutely.
So the book suggests that this learned helplessness is actually tied to the brain's response
Yes.
to like stress and threat.
Exactly. When students are constantly in a state of stress,
Yeah.
their brains go into survival mode.
Right.
They're not able to focus on learning
Mm-hmm.
because they're too busy trying to protect themselves.
So how can we as like teachers or even just people who care about learning
Right.
help students break free from this cycle of like learned helplessness?
Well, culturally responsive teaching can
Yeah.
play a huge role here.
Yeah.
By creating a learning environment that
Yeah.
feels safe, supportive, and culturally affirming,
Right.
we can help students feel like they belong
Yeah.
and that their efforts will be valued.
So it's about shifting that mindset from like, I can't do this
Yes,
to like, I can learn this.
right.
I just need the right support.
Exactly. And that support can take many forms.
Okay.
It could be providing extra help, breaking down tasks into smaller chunks,
Yeah.
or simply offering encouragement and positive reinforcement.
Yeah. So the book talks about the importance of building like learning partnerships.
Yes.
With students.
Yes.
What does that like look like in practice?
Well, I think it's about moving beyond that traditional teacher-student dynamic where the teacher is, the holder of knowledge
Right.
and the student is the passive recipient.
Right.
It's about creating a more collaborative relationship where the teacher and student are working together
Uh-huh.
towards a common goal.
Okay. So it's more like a mentorship
Right.
where the teacher is kind of guiding the student on their learning journey.
Exactly. And that mentorship should be built on trust, respect, and a genuine belief in the student's potential.
Okay. So the book outlines like a 3-part framework for building these learning partnerships,
Yes.
rapport, alliance, and cognitive insight.
Yes.
Can you walk us through those stages?
Sure. So rapport is the foundation of any strong relationship.
Okay.
It's really about creating a sense of connection and trust
Yeah.
with the student.
Yeah, I imagine this is especially important
Yes.
for students who, might have had negative experiences with
Yes.
teachers in the past, or who, might feel like they don't belong in the classroom.
Yes.
So how do we build that rapport?
It starts with simple things, like actively listening to students,
Oh.
showing genuine interest in their lives,
Right.
and finding common ground.
Okay.
And the book suggests using what are called trust generators.
Trust generators. That sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
So these are small gestures or actions that can help build trust and connection.
Okay.
It could be using humor, sharing a personal story,
Right.
or simply acknowledging a student's interests or experiences.
So it's not necessarily about, grand gestures.
Right.
It's about those, small moments of connection
Exactly.
that show the student that you see them
Yes.
and that you care.
Yes.
Okay. And as that rapport builds, we can move into the next stage,
Right.
alliance. What does that entail?
So this is where the teacher becomes a true advocate for the student,
Okay.
going above and beyond to support their learning.
Uh-huh.
It's about setting high expectations,
Okay.
but also providing the scaffolding and guidance.
Right.
The student needs to meet those expectations.
Yeah, the book uses the term warm demander.
Yes.
I love that phrase because it captures that balance
Yes.
between being, supportive and challenging.
Absolutely.
It's about believing in the student's potential.
Yes.
While also, pushing them to grow.
Right. And that's a powerful combination.
Right.
When students feel supported and challenged at the same time,
Yeah.
they're more likely to engage with the material and to persevere through difficulties.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, now the final stage in the learning partnership
right.
is cognitive insight.
Yes.
Can you explain what that means?
Sure.
And how it kind of fits into the framework?
So cognitive insight is really about gaining a deep understanding of how the student thinks and learns.
Okay.
It's about identifying their strengths,
Very good.
their weaknesses, their learning style, and their preferred ways of processing information.
So it's kind of like becoming a detective,
It is.
looking for clues
Yes.
about how to best support the student's learning.
Exactly.
But how do we actually gain that insight?
Well, I think it requires a careful observation,
Right.
thoughtful questioning,
Right.
and a willingness to listen to the student, not just hear them.
Right. So it's about moving beyond assumptions
Right.
and really taking the time to understand the individual learner.
Yes.
I imagine this is where things like formative assessments,
Yes.
student work samples,
Right.
and those one-on-one conversations can be really helpful.
Absolutely. Those are all valuable tools
Yeah.
for gathering information and gaining insight into the student's thinking process.
Okay. But the book also stresses that cognitive insight
Yes.
is not a one-time event.
It's not. It's an ongoing process.
Okay, so we're constantly observing,
Yes.
reflecting, and adjusting our approach
Yes.
based on what we're learning about the
Yeah, it's a
student.
dynamic process.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that cognitive insight
Yes.
is not just about the teacher
Right.
understanding the student.
It's also about the student understanding themselves.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So if students can develop that self-awareness,
Yes.
that ability to reflect on their own learning process,
Yes.
they can become more independent and self-directed learners.
Precisely. The book talks about the importance of fostering metacognitive skills.
Okay, metacognition, that's a
Oh,
big word.
I know, right?
Can you break that down for us?
It really is just the ability to think about your own thinking.
Okay.
It's about being aware of how you learn best,
Uh-huh.
what strategies work for you,
Yeah.
and how to monitor your own progress.
So instead of just going through the motions of learning,
Right.
you're actually taking a step back
Yes.
and thinking about the process itself.
Exactly.
Okay, that's a really valuable skill. Not just for school, but
Yeah.
for life in general.
Absolutely. And the book provides some great strategies for
Okay.
promoting metacognition in the classroom.
Okay.
Like encouraging students to set goals, track their progress,
Oh.
and reflect on their learning experiences.
So it's about giving students the tools they need to become self-directed learners
Yes.
who are able to take ownership of their education
Right.
and achieve their goals.
Exactly.
Now something else that really stood out to me in the book
Yes.
was the discussion about storytelling.
Oh, yeah.
It suggests that storytelling can actually physically synchronize brains.
I know. Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah, tell me more about that.
So this is one of the most fascinating insights from the book.
Okay.
It explains that when we listen to a story,
Yeah.
our brains release certain chemicals
Okay.
that create a sense of connection and empathy.
Uh-huh.
And when we share stories with others, our brain waves can actually start to synchronize.
Wow. So it's like we're literally getting on the same wavelength.
It's like we're on the same wavelength, yeah.
So by incorporating storytelling into the learning environment,
Yes.
we can actually create like a stronger sense of community and
Ab-
connection among students.
Exactly. And it's not just about telling stories. It's also about giving students opportunities to share their own stories, their own lived experiences.
Yeah, that could be incredibly powerful,
You can.
especially for students who might feel like their voices aren't being heard.
Absolutely.
It's a way of validating their experiences
Yes.
and honoring their cultural backgrounds.
And it can also be a powerful tool for teaching empathy and understanding.
Right.
When we hear other people's stories,
Yeah.
we're able to step into their shoes and see the world from their perspective.
That makes me think about the importance of using like culturally relevant teaching materials.
Yes.
It's not just about like representing diversity for diversity's sake.
Right.
It's about exposing students
Yeah.
to a wider range of perspectives and experiences.
Absolutely. The books, articles, videos, and other resources we use in the classroom
Uh-huh.
should reflect the diversity of our students' cultures and experiences.
Right.
And this not only helps students feel seen and valued,
Yeah.
but it also broadens their understanding of the world.
And I imagine it can also make learning more engaging
Yes,
and relevant for students when they see themselves reflected
exactly.
in the materials they're using.
It's about making those connections
Right.
between what they're learning in the classroom
Yeah.
and their own lives and experiences.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, the book also talks about the importance of wise feedback.
Yes.
Can you explain what that means?
Sure.
And how it's different from just like regular feedback?
So wise feedback is feedback that is specific, actionable,
Okay.
and delivered in a way that is culturally sensitive
Right.
and avoids triggering a student's stress response.
Okay.
It's really about finding that balance
Uh,
between being honest and being supportive.
so instead of just saying like, good job,
Right,
or, you need to try harder,
right.
we're giving students like concrete examples
Yes,
of what they're doing well
right.
and specific suggestions for how to improve.
Exactly. And we're also being mindful of the student's cultural background
Uh-huh.
and how they might interpret feedback.
Right.
What might feel motivating to one student
Yeah.
could feel demoralizing to another.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's about being like attuned to those individual differences.
Yes.
And adjusting our feedback style accordingly.
Exactly. And the book even provides a specific protocol
Okay.
for giving asset-based feedback,
Okay.
which focuses on a student's strengths and potential,
Right.
even when pointing out areas for improvement.
I love that approach because
Yeah.
it's about like building students up, not tearing them down.
Exactly.
It's about helping them to see themselves as capable learners
Yes.
who can achieve their goals
Right.
with effort and support.
And that ties into that concept of academic mindset,
Okay.
which is, the set of beliefs we hold about
Yeah.
our ability to learn and succeed.
Right. And the book talks about the difference between like a growth mindset
Yes.
and a fixed mindset.
Yes.
Can you remind us like what those terms mean?
Sure. So a growth mindset is the belief that intelligence can be developed through effort and learning.
Okay.
People with a growth mindset embrace challenges and see setbacks as opportunities to learn and grow.
And a fixed mindset
Yeah.
is the belief that like intelligence is predetermined
Right.
and unchangeable.
Right. People with a fixed mindset avoid challenges and
Uh.
give up easily when they face setbacks.
Right.
Yeah.
And the book suggests that academic mindset could be heavily influenced by a student's cultural background
Exactly.
and experiences.
Absolutely. Students who have faced discrimination
Right.
or who have been told, either directly or indirectly, that
Yeah.
they're not as capable as others
Yeah.
are more likely to develop a fixed mindset.
So it's not just about like individual personality or willpower.
Right.
It's about understanding the social and cultural context
Yes.
that shapes a student's beliefs about themselves
Right.
and their ability to learn.
Exactly. And that's why culturally responsive teaching is so important.
Right.
By creating a learning environment that is inclusive, supportive, and challenging,
Yeah,
we can help students develop a growth mindset and reach their full potential.
totally. Now the book also delves into the concept of information processing.
Yes.
Can you break down what that means
Sure.
and how it connects to, like, culturally responsive teaching?
So information processing is essentially how our brains take in, organize, and store information.
Okay.
And the book highlights that this process can vary
Okay.
depending on cultural background.
So are you saying that people from different coaches
Yes.
might actually, like, process information differently?
Yes, they might.
How does that work?
Well, our experiences shape how our brains make sense of the world. For example, students from cultures with strong oral traditions
Right.
might be more adept at processing information through listening and storytelling,
Right.
whereas students from cultures that emphasize visual learning
Right.
might benefit from graphic organizers, diagrams, or other visual aids.
Right. Right. Okay.
So
Culturally responsive teaching recognizes these differences
it does.
and provides, like, multiple pathways
Yes.
for students to access and process information.
Exactly. It's about creating a learning environment
Right.
that caters to a variety of learning styles and preferences.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Instead of assuming that everyone learns the same way,
Right.
we need to be, like, flexible and adaptable,
Yes.
providing different avenues for students to engage with the material.
Exactly. And by doing so, we're not just making learning more accessible.
Yeah.
We're also helping students develop a deepened understanding of the content.
Yeah, it's about tapping into their strengths
Yes.
and providing them with the tools they need to succeed.
Exactly.
Now, another important aspect of culturally responsive teaching
Right.
is creating a community of learners in the classroom.
Yes, absolutely.
What does that look like in practice?
Well, it's about fostering a sense of belonging, respect, and collaboration among students.
Okay.
It's about creating an environment where everyone feels safe to share their ideas, ask questions,
Right.
and learn from each other.
So it's not just about the individual learner.
Right.
It's about creating a collective learning experience
Yes.
where everyone feels valued and supported.
Exactly. And this requires intentionality on the part of the teacher.
Okay.
The book suggests things like establishing clear routines and expectations,
Uh-huh.
using inclusive language,
Right.
and providing opportunities for students to work together and learn from each other.
You know, I love the idea of involving students in creating the classroom rules and norms.
Oh, that's a great idea.
That gives them, like, a sense of ownership
Absolutely.
and empowers them to take responsibility
Yes.
for their learning environment.
And it's also a great way to learn about their cultural values and perspectives.
Yeah.
What might be considered respectful behavior in one culture could
Yeah.
be different in another.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
By involving students in the process,
Yes.
we're not only creating a more inclusive environment,
Right.
we're also, like, learning from them.
Yeah.
And expanding our own understanding of cultural differences.
Absolutely. And that's what culturally responsive teaching is all about.
Right.
It's a journey of continuous learning and growth
Yeah.
for both the teacher and the student.
So, we've been talking a lot about, like, the social and emotional aspects of learning.
Right.
But the book also highlights the importance of, like, the
Yes.
physical learning environment.
Absolutely. The book challenges us to think beyond just arranging desks and putting up posters.
Uh-huh.
It suggests that the physical space should be intentionally designed to create a sense of belonging
Okay.
and to reflect the values of a community of learners.
So instead of, like, a sterile institutional feeling classroom,
Yes.
we're talking about a space that feels, like, welcoming, personalized, and culturally relevant.
Exactly. It's about incorporating elements that represent students' cultures
Right.
and create a sense of warmth and personalization.
Okay.
The book suggests using things like natural light, comfortable seating, and displays of student work.
Yeah.
Even something as simple as playing music from
Right.
different cultures can make a big difference.
Yeah, I love the idea of, like, involving students in creating the classroom environment.
Oh, me too.
It not only makes the space more inviting,
Yes.
but it also gives them, like, a sense of ownership and agency.
Absolutely. When students feel like they have a voice in shaping their learning space,
Right.
they're more likely to feel connected to it and invested in their learning.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about language.
Okay.
It's such a fundamental part of learning.
Right.
But the book points out that the traditional ways we use language in the classroom
Yeah.
don't always work for all students.
That's a really important point. students from different cultural backgrounds might have different communication styles
Right.
and ways of using language.
Yeah.
What might be considered respectful or appropriate in one culture could
Yeah.
be very different in another.
So it's not just about, like, teaching students the correct way to speak or write. It's
Right.
about, like, recognizing and valuing
Yes.
the diversity of language and communication styles that they bring to the classroom.
Exactly. The book encourages teachers to be mindful of their own language use, avoiding jargon,
Yeah, huh?
and making sure instructors are clear and culturally sensitive.
Right.
It also suggests incorporating a variety of talk structures.
Okay, what do you mean by talk structures?
Yeah, so it's really about creating opportunities for students to engage in different types of conversations.
Right.
Sometimes we need formal, structured discussions where everyone takes turns speaking.
Right.
Other times, informal conversations or small group discussions
Yeah.
might be more appropriate.
Okay, so it's about creating, like, a dynamic language environment
Yes.
where students can use language in a variety of ways,
Exactly.
both to express themselves and to learn.
And the book provides some great examples of how teachers have created these rich language environments using things like storytelling circles, debate teams,
Right.
student-led discussions.
It's all about making language, like, come alive
Yes.
and making it a tool for learning, connection, and self-expression.
Absolutely.
One of the things that impressed me most about this book
Yeah.
is that it doesn't just present theory.
Right.
It's packed with practical strategies
Yes.
that teachers can start using right away
Yes.
to make their classrooms more culturally responsive.
Absolutely.
It even includes, like, specific lesson plan ideas
It does.
and examples of how teachers have successfully used these strategies
Yes.
in their classrooms. For instance, it talks about how to incorporate, culturally relevant literature into reading instruction,
Right.
how to use music and movement to teach math concepts,
Right.
and how to create projects that tap into students' cultural backgrounds.
Yeah, and it emphasizes that these strategies are not just for certain subjects or grade levels.
Right,
They can be adapted and applied across the curriculum
right.
and throughout a student's educational journey.
Yeah, this book really opened my eyes to the power of culturally responsive teaching.
Me too.
It's not just a trend or a buzzword.
It's not, it's a fundamental shift in how we think about teaching and learning.
Right.
It recognizes the importance of culture and identity in the classroom.
And it has the potential to, like, transform lives.
Absolutely.
It's about more than just, like, academic success.
It's about creating a more just and equitable world for everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the most powerful takeaways for me is that culturally responsive teaching is not a destination.
Uh-huh.
It's a journey.
Right.
It's about constantly learning, reflecting, and growing.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into culturally responsive teaching and the brain,
Yes.
what's one final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I would encourage everyone to think about a time when their own cultural background or learning style might have been misunderstood.
Okay?
How could applying the principles of culturally responsive teaching have changed that outcome?
Right.
And if you were to design the ideal learning environment for yourself,
Yeah.
what elements from this deep dive would you include?
Those are great questions for all of us to ponder.
I think so.
And for listeners who want to learn more,
Yes.
I highly recommend checking out the book, Culturally Responsive Teaching, The Brain, by Zaretta Hammond and Yvette Jackson.
Great book.
It's a fantastic book. The book's website, rayforriger.com,
Yes.
also offers some great resources.
Lots of resources.
And if you're interested in exploring, like, even more perspectives,
yeah,
the book's reference section has a fantastic list of additional titles,
it does.
including Bridging Cultures Between Home and School, A Guide for Teachers,
Yes.
The Light in Their Eyes, Creating Multicultural Learning Communities,
Another great book.
and Con Rispetto, Bridging the Distances Between Culturally Diverse Families and Schools.
Excellent. Yeah.
But yeah, remember, by understanding the brain and embracing cultural differences, we can create richer, more effective learning experiences for everyone.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and happy learning.